Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In this journey with Nicola Bizzi, we will explore a perspective that challenges conventional history, uncovering mysteries that stretch back tens of thousands of years and questioning everything we think we know about the origins of civilization. Nicola Bizzi opens his discourse with an observation of extraordinary scope. Pyramids are not an exclusively Egyptian phenomenon, but rather a sacred and monumental architectural form shared by civilizations that appear vastly distant and fundamentally different from one another, yet are distributed across every continent on Earth. From ancient Egypt to Mesoamerica, from the Near East to the Balkan Peninsula, from China to Indonesia, extending even to Antarctica and Italy, the pyramidal structure reappears with a consistency and coherence that can hardly be considered accidental. What mainstream historiography tends to interpret as a simple typological coincidence driven by structural or engineering needs becomes, for Bizzi, the starting point of a much deeper investigation, one into the common origin of these structures, the message they may contain, and the civilization or civilizations that built them. With an evocative tone, Bizzi describes the extraordinary experience of standing at the foot of the Great Pyramids of the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Those towering mountains of stone, rising with imposing grandeur toward the sky, are monuments imbued with mystery and fascination, structures about which not everything has been written and not everything has yet been said. Egypt entered European culture not only during the time of the Roman Empire, but above all in the modern era through the expeditions of Napoleon Bonaparte, which sparked widespread fascination across Europe for this ancient civilization. Yet, Bizzi emphasizes, if one truly wishes to speak about pyramids, one must not look only to Egypt. One need only look around the world, for the pyramid is a structure found on every continent. The very word pyramid is believed to have Greek origins, containing the root pyr, meaning fire, as these structures rise toward the sky like a flame. A striking definition that would likely have met with the full approval of Herodotus, the father of history, and many other writers of antiquity, who were deeply fascinated by these majestic stone monuments and believed them to have been built by the gods themselves. And perhaps, Bizzi cautiously suggests that ancient belief was not entirely far from the truth. Egyptian civilization followed an unbroken line of development spanning over 5,000 years, from what archaeologists define as the pre-dynastic period, through the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under a legendary ruler known as Menes or Manes, and into the Pharaonic era, conventionally dated to begin around 3100 BCE with the First Dynasty. Lower Egypt stretches toward the Mediterranean, while Upper Egypt borders Nubia, and from this union emerged the civilization that produced the Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Mainstream archaeology attributes the three pyramids of Giza to the 4th dynasty, identifying the pharaohs Khufu, Cheops, Khafre, Chephren, and Menkaure, Mykerinos, as their patrons, and interpreting these structures as monumental tombs, mausoleums intended to house the remains of the rulers for eternity. Bizzi firmly challenges this interpretation, arguing that it rests on entirely hypothetical foundations. The attribution of the Great Pyramid to Khufu, in particular, was proposed by a 19th-century British military officer, Colonel Vyse, and has since been largely accepted without decisive supporting evidence. On the contrary, Bizzi suggests, everything points to the conclusion that the pyramids were not tombs. In this regard, he highlights a decisive element that is systematically ignored or underestimated. The three pyramids of Giza are the only structures in the entire Nile Valley that contain no inscriptions whatsoever within them. This sharply distinguishes them from all later pyramids, which instead bear abundant texts, inscriptions, and dedications. Moreover, pyramids built after those of Giza show clear signs of imperfect construction. Many have collapsed. Many have been reduced to piles of rubble, as if there had been a cultural and architectural regression compared to an earlier period. This, Bizzi argues, is a crucial point. It suggests that those who built the three great pyramids of Giza possessed construction techniques that later generations no longer retained. From a technological standpoint, the Great Pyramid raises questions that contemporary science has yet to resolve. Based on current engineering knowledge, it is widely considered unlikely that the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom could have constructed such a monument with the tools available to them. They were a civilization that apparently did not yet make use of bronze and relied on rudimentary copper tools, a material far too soft for working stone on such a scale. And yet the structure exists, exhibiting a level of technical precision that continues to astonish even today's most skilled engineers and architects. Within this context, Bizzi introduces a broader critical reflection on academic archaeology. Egyptologists, he argues, form something of an elite caste within the discipline, one that resists external interference and operates within firmly established paradigms. Paradigms, as Thomas Kuhn taught, serve a legitimate purpose. They help define the state of knowledge and guide research. However, they must not become rigid or fossilized. They must evolve in response to new discoveries. In academic archaeology, this evolutionary process often struggles to take place, with considerable resistance toward any findings that might challenge established chronologies, which are treated almost dogmatically. The intellectual structures built upon these paradigms, Bizzi suggests with a powerful metaphor, are constructed on sand, and sooner or later, they are destined to collapse. All ancient peoples preserved memories of earlier cycles of civilization. Hesiod, in his Theogony and Works and Days, describes our current humanity as the fifth to inhabit the earth, preceded by four successive civilizations that arose, flourished, declined, and ultimately collapsed due to great cyclical cataclysms. Like the Sumerians, who preserved records of remote epochs in their chronicles, ancient Egypt also retained the awareness of a far more ancient civilization. The priestly class, custodians of archives and sacred texts, believed that their civilization had roots extending back over 30,000 years, perhaps even 34,000. The most important source of this tradition is Manetho, a high priest of Egypt during the Ptolemaic period. Commissioned by Ptolemy I to compile a historical chronology based on temple records, Manetho produced a work that extends far beyond conventional pharaonic history. He describes a primordial era known as Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked the earth alongside humans, a period that, according to his chronology, lasted approximately 13,420 years. This was followed by the period of Horus, an era after the death of Osiris, dominated by the reign of the falcon god, lasting about 23,000 years. Finally, before the beginning of conventional pharaonic history, came the age of the demigods, the Shemsahor, the followers of Horus. By summing these three phases, Bizzi arrives at a total chronology that pushes the origins of Egyptian civilization back roughly 34,000 years. This figure, he insists, is not a modern speculation but is contained within ancient texts themselves, written by a priest under the commission of a pharaoh. Moreover, he emphasizes, it is increasingly echoed by controversial, yet scientifically documented archaeological discoveries, findings that suggest the existence of cycles of civilization far older than what academic history is willing to acknowledge. One of the most fascinating and lesser-known episodes in Egyptian history concerns Prince Herodotus, grandson of Pharaoh Menkaure, who lived around 2700 BCE. This historical figure was an avid practitioner of archaeology, a discipline that, in fact, already existed in antiquity, as ancient peoples themselves conducted excavations in search of the remains of earlier civilizations. Herodotus was carrying out excavations on the Giza Plateau at the foot of an extremely ancient statue of Osiris, which he himself already considered to be of remote antiquity. During a deep excavation beneath its base, he discovered a large metallic tablet, described as resembling bronze, decorated with lapis lazuli and precious stones, bearing inscriptions in a language completely unknown to the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty. The description of this tablet bears some resemblance to the famous Bimbine tablet, a remarkable artifact previously discussed by Bizzi. However, while the Bimbine tablet dates to the Ptolemaic or even Roman period and is written in hieroglyphs, the tablet discovered by Herodotus was inscribed in a language that could not be translated in 4th dynasty Egypt. Undeterred, the prince assembled a commission of priests, scribes, and scholars tasked with deciphering it. Their efforts proved unsuccessful for a long time, until, after months of work, a sage came forward claiming to be the custodian of that ancient language. He succeeded in translating it, and according to this account, the contents of that translation became what we now know as the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is regarded by mainstream archaeology as a text of the Pharaonic era, whose passages were transcribed onto the wrappings of mummies during the embalming process and onto the walls of certain pyramids, giving rise to the so-called pyramid texts. Yet the account of Herodotus completely overturns this interpretation. According to this narrative, the text did not belong to Egyptian civilization at all, but had been inherited from a far older, preceding culture. Herodotus is also said to have composed a preface in which he proudly claimed his discovery. Bizzi quotes its content in full. This text was discovered by me, Prince Herodotus, during the reign of Pharaoh my uncle Menkaure, in the city of Kinu, at the foot of the statue of the god Osiris. It was inscribed on a great bronze tablet, and the entire inscription was composed of various lapis lazuli inlays set into the bronze. I, Prince Herodotus, made this discovery during one of my excavation campaigns among the ruins of ancient temples. Fortunately, my assistant Necht, who accompanied me, succeeded in understanding the meaning of these writings. Thus I, the prince, personally came to realize the great mystery contained in these inscriptions, a mystery that no human eye had ever beheld before us, and I brought it to Pharaoh my uncle so that he might read it. This testimony, which Bizzi considers to be of extraordinary historical value, is categorically dismissed by contemporary archaeology, often reduced to legend or literary fiction. And yet, it explicitly attests, through the words of Menkaure's own nephew, the existence of a written language belonging to a prior civilization, already forgotten by the time of the 4th dynasty, and decipherable only by a handful of rare and learned individuals. It also attests that archaeological excavations were already being conducted in the Giza Plateau in that remote era, and that the plateau itself preserved traces of an even more ancient past. Further support for the remote antiquity of the Giza pyramids, Bizzi argues, comes from the testimony of Herodotus, the father of history, who visited Egypt along with many other Greek philosophers and intellectuals. For the ancient Greek thinkers, among them Solon, Plato, and Proclus, Egypt represented a kind of pilgrimage to the source of primordial knowledge, a place where one could draw from the deepest well of ancient wisdom. Herodotus was the first to describe the pyramids of Giza in writing, and he did so in terms significantly different from how we see them today. He reported that the pyramids were covered with gleaming white limestone casing stones, shining brilliantly under the sun. Portions of this casing still survive today on the Pyramid of Khafre. Crucially, however, these stones were covered with inscriptions, and no one, in Herodotus's time, was able to translate them. This is a detail of extraordinary importance, strongly emphasized by Bizzi. In Herodotus's era, Egyptian hieroglyphic writing was still fully in use. Demotic and hieratic scripts were employed for daily communication, and classical hieroglyphs remained perfectly known, readable, and interpretable, the sacred language of a still living civilization. And yet, the inscriptions on the casing stones of the Giza pyramids were already incomprehensible. How could the language of monuments supposedly built only a few centuries earlier be unreadable in 5th century BC Egypt? The implicit answer Bizzi suggests is that those pyramids were far, far older. A similar confirmation, he argues, comes from ancient Arab authors. Egypt fell under Muslim rule in the 7th century CE and became part of the Arab Caliphate. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, numerous Arab chroniclers and travelers, including the great Ibn Battuta and al-Makrizi, author of the important historical work Al-Kaitat, as well as scholars such as Abd al-Hakam and al-Mudi, described the monuments of ancient Egypt. All of them confirm that the 3 pyramids of Giza were still clad in white stones covered with mysterious inscriptions, and all agree that, even in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century CE, these inscriptions remained incomprehensible, despite the fact that Egyptian hieroglyphs were still known among Coptic and Greek scholars. So when, truly, were these pyramids built? That is the great enigma. But the Arab chronicles add something even more significant. They record a widespread tradition in Egypt according to which the 3 pyramids of Giza were not built by the pharaohs, but by an ancient antediluvian ruler named Sorid or Suri. Some scholars believe this name to be a distortion of Osiris. Other traditions identify him with the first Hermes, Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical master of all wisdom, later associated with the Egyptian god Thoth, deity of writing. All these accounts agree. The 3 pyramids of the Giza Plateau were erected by the will of this legendary ruler. Some chronicles even suggest a date of 34,000 years ago, a figure that echoes the chronology of Manetho, or more generally place their construction before the flood. According to these traditions, the pyramids were conceived following a prophetic dream experienced by King Sorid. In this vision, he foresaw a great cataclysm, a vast deluge, and resolved to build those immense stone mountains in order to preserve within them the knowledge of his civilization, sacred writings, books, and powerful objects, so that they might survive the impending disaster. A tradition that strikingly echoes the biblical story of Noah and finds parallels in many cultures around the world. The Giza Plateau holds many other mysteries beyond the pyramids themselves. Bizzi alludes to underground cavities that were partially explored as early as the 1930s, cavities whose very existence some archaeologists now attempt to deny, despite accounts describing true labyrinths. The Valley Temple, located at the foot of the Sphinx, is constructed from enormous monolithic blocks. Many researchers believe it was merely restored during the Pharaonic period, while its original construction dates back to a much earlier civilization. The Sphinx itself lies at the center of one of the most heated debates in modern archaeology. Geological studies have shown that the Sphinx bears clear signs of erosion caused by prolonged and intense rainfall, a form of weathering incompatible with the dry, arid climate that has characterized Egypt for at least the past 5,000 years. This suggests that the Sphinx was carved in a much earlier epoch, when Egypt's climate was tropical and rainy, long before the rise of Pharaonic civilization. These geological findings, particularly those advanced by American geologist Robert Schoch, represent one of the most serious challenges to the paradigms of conventional Egyptology, which continues to resist such conclusions. Bizzi then broadens his scope to the entire planet, arguing that pyramids are by no means confined to Egypt. Across the Americas alone, they number in the thousands. In Mesoamerica, in South America, and even in North America, where Spanish conquistador accounts describe pyramids in Texas and the southern United States. These structures, he notes, were allegedly destroyed by early European settlers to clear land for agriculture, an incalculable loss that remains only partially understood. In Mesoamerica alone, thousands of pyramids have been documented, the most famous being those of Teotihuacan. The pyramids of Teotihuacan are enigmatic structures bearing striking similarities to those of Egypt. Located about 40 kilometers from Mexico City and among the most visited archaeological sites in the world, they belong to a civilization predating both the Aztecs and the Maya, one about which very little is known. The Avenue of the Dead, the grand thoroughfare flanked by monumental buildings, culminating in the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, is not aligned with true geographic north, but deviates by approximately 11 degrees. According to the research of Charles Hapgood, this deviation aligns precisely with the position of the North Pole as it existed around 12,000 years ago, when it was located in what is now Hudson Bay in Canada. Remarkably, many other monumental structures and pyramids around the world appear to share this same alignment. While it cannot be definitively proven that the pyramids of Teotihuacan date back more than 12,000 years, Bizzi suggests that the original urban layout and the Avenue of the Dead may indeed belong to that remote epoch, with the visible pyramids representing later reconstructions or restorations of even older structures. China is one of the regions richest in pyramids worldwide. Until about 30 years ago, the Chinese government denied their existence. Today, roughly 900 pyramidal structures are officially recorded, some larger than those of Giza. None have yet undergone systematic and thorough excavation. Over millennia, layers of soil and vegetation, encouraged by China's humid and rainy climate, very different from Egypt's dry environment, have covered them, making them appear as forested hills. Many are believed to date back to 10,000 or even 12,000 BCE, suggesting a previous cycle of civilization. Their lack of exploration, Bizzi argues, appears not merely as a scientific gap, but almost as a deliberate choice. In Indonesia, at Gunung Padang, a large pyramid has been identified, expanded, and elevated multiple times over the ages until it became a vast artificial hill. Sonar investigations have revealed increasingly deep construction layers, with archaeologists suggesting that the oldest levels may date back to around 28,000 BCE. Who was building pyramids in Indonesia 30,000 years ago? Bizzi admits he does not know, but the question remains open, beyond the explanatory framework of conventional history. In Japan, several megalithic structures of pyramidal form exist whose origins remain entirely unknown. One of them, at Yonaguni, gained global attention when it was discovered underwater. Not a pyramid built of separate blocks, but an entire rocky hill seemingly shaped into a stepped, terraced structure resembling a pyramidal temple, complete with stairways and platforms. It lies submerged at depths ranging between 40 and 60 meters off the coast of Japan. In the Russian Caucasus, in the autonomous Republic of Kabardino-Balkaria, rises a mountain of strikingly pyramidal shape known as Karakaya or Karaora. Recently, a group of speleologists who had long been studying the area, rich in karst formations and underground caves, identified an artificial shaft on the slopes of this mountain, an opening among the rocks. The exploration of this shaft led to a discovery that Bizzi describes as astonishing and almost unbelievable. A very deep well, constructed entirely from gigantic monolithic blocks, perfectly aligned, with joints so precise and polished that not even a razor blade could be inserted between them. The shaft descends for more than 40 meters, after which it opens into a network of corridors and galleries still under exploration. One of these galleries bears an impressive resemblance to the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt. Russian authorities, whom Bizzi describes as far more open than their Western counterparts when it comes to anomalous archaeological evidence, have taken an interest in the discovery and are overseeing the ongoing investigations. Videos of the site have already been produced, though it remains under active study. Bizzi anticipates that he will dedicate a specific in-depth analysis to this site in future episodes of his channel, calling it one of the most significant discoveries of recent years. Pyramids have also been identified in Crimea, in the Canary Islands, and even near the Ural Mountains, where what may be the largest pyramid in the world has reportedly been located, a structure rising approximately 700 meters from base to summit, still untouched by any official archaeological excavation. The most sensational discovery discussed in Bizzi's account, however, concerns Bosnia. In 2006, anthropologist Samir Osmanagić, born in Sarajevo, later naturalized C as a U.S. citizen, and a graduate of the University of Sarajevo with deep knowledge of the region, had long been intrigued by the remarkably geometric, pyramidal shape of a large hill overlooking the town of Visoko, located about 30 kilometers southwest of Sarajevo. He decided to conduct exploratory surveys, but encountered numerous obstacles. Authorities were reluctant to grant permits, partly because the summit of the hill was already classified as an archaeological site due to the ruins of an ancient Ottoman fortress. Undeterred, Osmanagić purchased land at the base of the hill and began initial excavations. To his great surprise, he discovered that what appeared to be a natural hill was in fact a vast artificial pyramid, constructed from concrete blocks. The blocks measure roughly 2 meters on each side. Osmanagić named the structure the Great Pyramid of the Sun. Additional smaller pyramids have been identified in the surrounding area. One of them, known as the Pyramid of the Moon, is built from stone blocks and appears to have undergone additional terracing in a later period, still predating any civilization currently recognized by mainstream history. The Visoko Pyramid complex displays features of sacred geometry and astronomical alignment strikingly similar to those found in Egyptian and Mesoamerican pyramids. As above, so below. The idea that these structures mirror the arrangement of celestial bodies on Earth, in accordance with a universal Hermetic principle. The dating of the site was carried out using radiocarbon, carbon-14, analysis on organic material extracted from between the second and third layers of blocks forming the pyramid's surface, material believed to have accumulated during the construction phase. These tests were repeated and validated across 5 international laboratories in Paris, Berlin, Sarajevo, and Warsaw, consistently yielding the same result. The structure dates back to approximately 29,000 to 31,000 BCE. Even allowing for a margin of a few centuries, this places it at around 30,000 years old, an astonishing date. Who was building pyramids in Bosnia 30,000 years ago remains, for now, an unanswered question. But the Visoko site is not limited to the external pyramids. Beneath the entire area lies an extensive labyrinth of tunnels and passageways, still being excavated, several kilometers of which have already been cleared of debris. These tunnels contain crafted artifacts and side corridors that, at a later stage, believed to be around 19,000 years ago by another unknown civilization, were deliberately sealed with dry stone walls. The walls of these tunnels also bear inscriptions in a proto-runic script, resembling markings found in the Lascaux cave in France and sharing features with the so-called Danubian script, a system of writing discovered throughout the Balkan Peninsula along the Danube River, never fully deciphered and believed to be thousands of years older than Sumerian cuneiform. Today, the Visoko site is an officially recognized archaeological park by the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, managed by Osmanagić, whom Bizzi has hosted at a conference he organized in Florence and who is expected to appear soon on his channel. Bizzi concludes his exposition with a surprising reminder for Italian audiences. The Italian peninsula, too, contains pyramidal structures, largely ignored by academic archaeology. In Lombardy, the Monte Vecchio formations consist of natural hills that appear to have been shaped into pyramidal forms according to principles of sacred geography similar to those observed in the Great Pyramids of the world. In Umbria, along the shores of Lake Piediluco, perfectly pyramidal hills have been featured in documentaries produced in the United States, yet remain virtually unknown even to local residents. Other pyramidal formations have been identified and cataloged in Umbria and Tuscany, including the so-called pyramids of Pontifice. Perhaps the most significant structure in Italy, however, is the Pyramid of Porcorai in the province of Lucca, where an immense stepped, pyramid-like hill rises above the town. Pyramidal formations or pyramid-shaped hills have also been reported in Lazio, in Campania, at Sant'Agata dei Goti and Volturare Irpina, and even in Calabria, along the coast of Silla, where imposing pyramidal structures stand close to the sea. In Sardinia, there exists an actual pyramid, Monte Diacati, which closely resembles a Mesopotamian ziggurat, an already enigmatic feature that is rarely discussed in appropriate terms. Not even the Antarctic continent appears to be an exception. Pyramid-shaped structures, which some studies attribute to an artificial origin, have reportedly been identified there as well. Possible remnants of a remote civilization now buried beneath kilometers of ice. Bizzi's discourse concludes with a sweeping reflection that encapsulates its central theme. The pyramidal structure is not an architectural form that arose independently in different parts of the world through mere convergent development. Rather, it is the tangible and ubiquitous testimony of one, or perhaps several, extremely ancient cycles of civilization, now almost entirely forgotten, which have left their monumental imprint across all continents. These civilizations possessed construction techniques that we still do not fully understand, were capable of orienting their buildings with astronomical precision, and had accumulated a body of knowledge that official history remains unwilling to acknowledge. The message preserved within those stones still awaits full decipherment. Meanwhile, academic archaeology, entrenched in paradigms that Bizzi describes as built on sand, is increasingly confronted with a growing body of evidence, scientifically grounded, that challenges its very foundations. And sooner or later, as the history of science teaches us, those paradigms will have to give way. That's all for today. See you in the next episode of Saturday Classics, here on Compelling Topics.